Hi, everybody, and welcome to Exegetically Speaking, a podcast of the friends and faculty of Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. My name is David Capes, and I am the Senior Research Fellow at the Lanier Theological Library and a former dean up there in Wheaton at the School of Biblical and Theological Studies. Our purpose in these podcasts is really very simple. We want to promote the study of biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, so we can read the Bible more faithfully, study it more fully, and not just read it, but to live it. Joining me today on Exegetically Speaking is Travis Wright, PhD student at Cambridge University and doing a PhD in the field of cognitive linguistics in the Greek Bible, particularly the book of Ezekiel, I think, right?
Right, that's right.
And you and a friend run a website and a service for people trying to relearn Greek or learn it for the first time, bibling.org, bibling.org. Tell us a little bit about that.
Bibling's an educational platform that my friend Andrew, a fellow PhD student at Cambridge, and I created. And the idea was to democratize education in biblical languages by bringing it to everyone in a way that we thought was most effective, most efficient, and would be most enjoyable. And so we do that in small cohorts individually, and we also have some reading workshops as well. So everyone from the beginner to the pastor to somebody who wants to improve or explore advanced grammar could do that with us. And
they can do this not only from the West, but also from the majority world, too.
That's right, yeah. So, time zones can be tricky sometimes. But yeah.
Exactly. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about the beautiful Hebrew of Psalm 1, verse 1. Let us hear you read that first, and then let's talk a little bit about both the sound of the poetry, but also some of those wonderful metaphors there.
Okay, great. Psalm 1. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach ba'atzat rashaim, uvaderech chata'im lo amad, uvmoshav letzim lo yashav.
And I hear, blessed is the man.
Yeah.
As we begin. So this is poetry. You're a poet. You write about poetry. You're a poet in your own right?
Yeah.
Not in your own mind, but in your own right.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about Hebrew poetry and how this affects you as you hear it first, as you hear the sound.
Of course.
Because what we hear in English is not that same beauty, that same sound.
Of course, yeah. So English is going to have different strategies to achieve the same things that Hebrew does, but Hebrew here uses something that English does use. At least in the first three words, you can hear alliteration, which is the repetition of initial sounds, like a K sound in the Cool Cats or something like that. But you can hear it here. Technically, you have three alepphs, Ashrei, Ha'ish, Asher. But then you also can hear the sound quality with assonance. So you have the shin and the resh, especially the shin, which is repeated in all three words. Ashrei, ha'ish, asher. So very terse,
so you have these
very
sounds
dense
that repeat themselves. Yeah.
Right. So poets call these the formal features that would transform prose into poetry. So the sound quality builds the aesthetic nature of the text.
And part of poetry is not just, okay, I can translate this into a new language, but it's the sound of this thing itself. It's the rhythm of it. It's there are features that are almost impossible to translate.
And I would say that they're invisible, I think, is a good way of describing it, because I think there's a ditch on either side. We could say that, you hear sometimes people say English is a dumb language or something like that. It's like, no, English is a brilliant language. Every language is brilliant. But Hebrew is specific, and these formal features, which are shared with English here, are what transform this into poetry. It's something, though, that would be invisible in an English translation. It's a part of the defense I would give of the value of biblical languages. It would be impossible, I think, to hear in Hebrew poetry the density and the brilliance and the beauty that's happening there.
One of the poetic features is our acrostics, and where you have these letters. It's like, A is for apple, B is for bear, that kind of thing. But you have that in some of the Psalms, and you have that in Lamentations and a variety of other places as well. You can't see that. You can't hear that at all in translation.
No, you can't. It's a part of the brilliance here of this text. I mean, it's just incredibly beautiful. So,
and you've got some wonderful metaphors that we talked about earlier that describe human action, but it really doesn't describe human action. It
Yeah,
describes
that's
something
true.
beyond.
So you have these three verbs here. You have halach, which is to walk, and amad, which is to stand, and yeshav, which is to sit. And each one of those is sort of activating a different part of the metaphor, life is a journey, which you find in a lot of the world's languages. In English, we might say, like, it's been 6 months since you've been on a diet. How's it going? And he'd say, it's a long road. It's been a long road. So
the long and winding road,
Yeah.
the Paul McCartney says.
Yeah, exactly. And so what the poet here is doing is really interesting in using that metaphor and taking kind of three different angles on it. You have some interesting parallels happening here, not only in semantic parallels, right? So Hebrew rhymes thoughts instead of words necessarily. Mm-hmm. But
that's an interesting way of saying it. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and so you have mundane activities. You're walking, you're standing, you're sitting. But even, the last clause here, uv moshav letzim lo yashav, you can hear the sound quality between moshav and yashav, and just a really beautiful verse here. So, and thinking through a way in which the quality of the underlying text would be invisible in an English translation, poetry is a hallmark example of this.
And this is, if you look at the genre, what this is a wisdom psalm. Right. It's the beginning of the Psalter or the book of Psalms, and it begins with a bit of wisdom that contrasts the one who is righteous and just, the man who is righteous and just, from the one who walks and with sinners, and the one who sits among scoffers.
Well, that's so interesting about the text too, because Haish is singular, right? But then Haish is compared to these three different categories of the wicked fool, but it's all in plural: Rashaim, Chataim, and then Letzim. So they're all plural. Holiness is lonely, and I guess you could say
holiness is lonely.
Yeah. So it's not blessed are the people, right? But rather blessed is the one, the man. And then that man is then compared to a gulf of different kinds of persons, all of which belong to these categories. And then the word order as well is really interesting here in this text. Yeah.
So how would you translate chapter 1, verse 1? If you're having to put it into English and get it out of that beautiful poetry, Hebrew poetry, how would you put it into English?
In English, off the top of my head, I'd say give it a very traditional translation. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, and in the way of sinners he does not stand, and in the seat of scoffers he does not sit. You can hear the differences in word order there as well, which are interesting.
Yeah. But the righteous is like the one who studies the law, right? And so there's a contrast that's given almost immediately. And then it goes on to talk about the difference between a tree that is firmly planted by water and always in leaf, always flowering and blooming. And
I think that's a part of the literary artistry at work here in the Hebrew text is the three comparisons take the form of a denial, but then it's in linguistics we call it a point-counterpoint set. And so you have not this, but this. And so the righteous man is described as somebody who does not do this, or this, or this, but. And so it's sort of this dramatic build-up to who exactly this righteous man actually is.
Thanks so much today for Travis for being with us here on Exegetically Speaking to talk about Psalm 1, verse 1.
You.
Thanks to Silvio Vasquez, Rebecca Larson, and Krista Sanchez for helping us to produce this podcast. Thanks as well to Phil Keggy for our music. If you want to study biblical languages, the best place you could do that is Wheaton College. They have an amazing program, one of the best I've ever seen, whether you want to be a graduate or an undergraduate student. So go to the website, www.wheaton.edu, and look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. If you have questions or comments about this podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Contact us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for listening.